Chapter 711 Devouring the Sun. Like a middle line dividing yin and yang. Atop the primordial water, the world seemed bisected as if cleaved in twain, one half filled with boundless light, igniting an undying golden blaze. The other half plummeted into darkness, void of even a glimmer of light. Day and night appeared to be born from the same sky. Witnessing this scene, Amon-Ra felt truly astonished. Without moving, he achieved this feat in a form akin to word spirit. If he hadn't devoured the power of the absolute void, then he, solely as the god of the sun, would likely be powerless against his opponent's full force, just like the scene before him. And were it not for the world's favor that came with the successive fall of the 9 pillar gods, he, as Amon-Ra Adam, would still struggle to contend with the other. After all, it was only due to the grand invasion from the alien realm that Ra could fully master the masculine symbol of the 8 primordial spirits, Amon, thereby eroding the feminine symbol, Amunet. Before that, a mere reincarnation was far from sufficient for him to replace the true 8 primordial spirits. But there are no what-ifs in reality. The most important aspect of godhood is purity. Adam did not understand this principle, which is why he perished. I understood it, which is why I only retained the sun, and then ruled this world until this day. Now it's time for my third decision. Having been silent for a long time, Amon-Ra took a step forward with a slight sigh. The entire void trembled with his breath. As the power from the other world retreated, the sun waged war within the mortal realm. The divine king Hemenu seemed ready to unleash his full strength. In an instant, Amon's unique divine authority was revealed in this world for the first time. A divine authority never seen before, even in the chaos world, and one of the keystones of existence. The underlying order of all things began to be erased layer by layer. Even the existence of the divine incarnations seemed unstable. This is the absolute void, the something born from the nothing beyond the world, and the corresponding nothing to all something within the world. Anything not recognized by it is false and non-existent. Whatever it denies will lose its foundation for existence in this world. In a moment, as if roles were inverted and strength exchanged, the seat of the divine became obscured. But soon, under Ra's gaze, the obscurity ceased. A force of eternal recurrence spontaneously encircled the outer god, warding off his assault. As expected. His expression changed slightly, as if shocked and angered by the enemy's strength. Yet in reality, there was no surprise in his heart. He hadn't truly used all his power. In fact, at this moment, Ra only wielded the strength he possessed at the beginning. He hadn't tapped into the world's favor granted through the fall of the 9 pillar spirit. At this point, Ra no longer wished to prevent the other god from destroying the sun. The son of Hemenu was the true pillar of the world, holding divine authority over rebirth, light, fire, celestial body, and omniscience. The result of their unification, and the single power beyond the scope of the 8 primordial spirits that ranked above the true god. It was so vital, so powerful, that only with its destruction would Hemenu truly reach the end of the road, pouring even more strength into Ra. Reluctant to let it go? Somewhat. After all, in terms of the versatility of divine authority, none among the chaotic gods could match Egypt's sun in omnipotence. But when the moment came to make a decision, Ra was resolute. Enough of this. Boom! Thought did not impede action. Heaven and earth cooperated. When Amon-Ra above the primordial water exerted force, the sun shone forth once more. Endless divine light pursued the darkness, as if intent on expelling the outer god's presence from the mortal realm. The earth seemed unable to bear such force, fissures emerging across its surface. The churning Nile River beat against its shores, its crimson waters portending ill omens. Ra's movements were ruthless, yet the disparity in strength made it hard to turn the tide. His inner strength surged, yet his outward show of power remained unchanged. He didn't want to stop the outer god now, but he couldn't not act. To watch the other half of the sun falter without reaction would be the greatest absurdity. So Ra could only perform the most standard response, striking at the outer god with fury. Boom! The position of the sun began to shift, hurtling towards the region shrouded in darkness. And before its moving trajectory, all matter turned to dust. I've nearly grasped the extent of your power. This is the alien realm, but caution is needed most when success is near. No fish should slip through the net before the final battle. With a glint in his eyes, R.A. glanced downward. He naturally wasn't observing Isis. When all was over, he would personally end the life of the traitor, but at least for now, she had no qualification to affect the great divine power. He was watching the hidden void at the world's backside, the gradually breaking chains. Apep, the ancient serpent, the embodiment of destruction. It must be said that in most mythological tales, serpents often play some negative, terrifying role. And in the world of Hemenu, Apep was such an existence. Perhaps it was the world's inherent frailty that prevented order from completely ruling. The demon god born at the dawn of creation was eternal, bringing endless troubles to 2 generations of sun gods. Chapter 7:12 Devouring the Sun _2. It had now become the last existence that had a chance to influence the situation. Even R.A. had noticed that the opponent's strength was also rising. If the sun was the beginning of all things for Hemenu, a positive masculine manifestation, then Apep was the end of all things, a negative feminine manifestation. Its purpose of birth was to destroy the world, to reset all things. Even though the world did not favor it during this critical moment, as the destruction of all things intensified, it was still growing stronger. Crack, even separated by the vast void, the sound of the chains breaking on the serpent's body was heard by Amon Ra. If he wished, he now had the spare strength to continue suppressing it. But he did nothing, instead withdrawing the power of the seal, as if he were already too weak to maintain the seal under the pressure of the outer god. Soundlessly, the light emitted by the sun grew stronger, its trajectory continually making subtle adjustments. At one moment, under the shroud of the endless void, R.A. gave a slight smile. For tens of thousands of years, you've always wanted to swallow the sun. Now you have your chance. Below the earth, in the darkness of the void lit by light, Pep opened its eyes. Hiss, in a chaotic darkness where there was no light. But as the god of sun exerted his full force, even on the dark side of the world, light finally broke through. The pale golden sunlight seemed to contain the will of R.A. Adam, merging the might of 2 generations of sun gods. It brought life to everything in the world, dispelling all dangers and calamities. But Apep disliked this light, for it was inherently danger, inherently calamity. Its sole purpose of existence was to destroy the world, and to destroy the world, it had to destroy the sun first. Ever since the ancient Adam was born beside the Benben stone from a stone egg, it was born under the darkness where the sun could not shine. When it first saw light, it knew that only one of them could exist in this world. Thus, even without wisdom, without rationale, for millions of years, Apep still remembered one thing. Destroy the sun. Its chaotic, perplexed eyes opened, and the giant serpent had long forgotten what had happened before. Its archenemy had suddenly become so strong that it was no match at all. But Apep didn't remember these things. It only knew that it was time to fight again. Rattle. The sound of sliding chains echoed with the twisting of the serpent's body. Those chains that had once tightly bound it now didn't seem so terrifying. As one chain after another broke under its movements, clearing away these bindings, Apep finally began seeking out that uncomfortable thing, the sun. A deep roar emanated from the snake's throat, filled with excitement and the intent to kill, but distinctly devoid of fear and hesitation. Previously, whenever it awoke from its slumber, the gods ruling the mortal realm would steer the solar barge here to battle it, never giving it a chance to surface on the land. But this time, there was nothing obstructing Apep. It's the sun. The sun. The sun. Even inferior to Typhon, the demon god of destruction had no ability to communicate. The sun was the only word it understood. The serpent's body shuddered, and with a crack sound, the remaining shackles turned into dust. Even across a great distance, Apep's chaotic eyes immediately noticed the source of light shining on him. It was the sun, and it was right above him. Roar! The world after Egypt's death was easily breached, and Laru, where the gods had once secured the souls of believers, crumbled one after another. A crack opened in the earth, and the giant serpent poked its head out. Above it, the sun moved at a seemingly slow but actually swift pace. It attempted to smash its body into the realm of darkness, scattering the outer god's power cast into the mortal realm. Then, the next moment, Apep opened its massive jaw, and the sky seemed to gain another crack. Then, with one bite, Hemenu's source of light, the beginning of all life, turned into its meal. Above the primordial water, Amon-Ra's face changed drastically as he stepped back in a defensive stance. However, sensing his strength rise again, his heart was as stable as Mount Tai. This was not enough. Apep swallowing the sun did not mean the sun was destroyed. In fact, in the long history, it had also been victorious in its struggles with the sun before. The so-called solar eclipse among mortals originated from this, showing that being swallowed temporarily does not truly lead to the sun's destruction. But this was unimportant, for overlooking the mortal world, Amon-Ra clearly saw that when Apep swallowed the sun, its body seemed to expand once again. In its chaotic pupils flickered black gleams, first looking at the ground beneath and then at the sky above. Yet, what Apep could not understand was that the powers corresponding to these two places had long since dissipated. Whether they had been destroyed held no significance anymore. In today's world, those once delectable snacks had vanished without a trace, leaving only a few scattered remnants. Only above the sky, it seemed there still existed two grand feasts. Hiss! The sun burned in its stomach. The pain only made Apep more excited. For any rational being, what it should do now was silently digest the sun within until it was utterly destroyed, or bring destruction to the mortal realm and let its symbolic annihilation ascend. But Apep did not think so. It lifted its snake head again, its crimson tongue swaying in the air. In its eyes, there was no fear, only greed facing things. Amon-Ra. That was the power of the void, not conflicting with the chaotic serpent. Even if it wanted all things to return to chaos, it still required the void to carry everything. Therefore, in Apep's instincts, Amon-Ra was automatically relegated to the last priority, and it targeted the existence on the other side. At this moment, the mortal realm was shrouded in darkness. Driven by the instinct of life, it could sense the terrible power of the opponent, which was stronger than its current strength. But this was not within Apep's consideration. It only knew, if it destroyed that being, then it might enjoy the true joy of annihilating the world. Hiss! Roar! The body moved again. Apep's body expanded 1,000,000 times. Its head slowly emerged from the mortal realm, poked out of the world, reached above the primordial water, and then charged at the target without hesitation. Success? Failure? That was not within its concerns. For millions of years, it had failed countless times, but as long as it was alive, it would never stop. Heh! Just as expected. He stepped back, as if eager to watch two enemies fight each other, joy surfacing on Amon-Ra's heart. The last two, I'll deliver them to you in one package. Then I will stand atop the world, and send you to meet them. Chapter 7:13. Casting the Sword. Whoosh! Piercing the sky, crossing the vast ocean, crossing the battleground where Amon-Ra had fought with deities before, nothing could stop Apep. As a world-destroying demon god born almost at the same moment as the primordial sun god, wandering in the void beyond the mortal world, Apep felt as comfortable as if it had returned home. It had been restrained for too long, and swallowing the sun had only slightly appeased its never-ending desire for destruction. Thus, with another appetizing supersized snack right in front of it, the eyes of the chaotic serpent couldn't help but shine brightly. It might seem formidable, but it was the most formidable one. Once again opening its enormous maw, like a basilisk swallowing an elephant, endless chaos and destruction intertwined between its lips and teeth, and the implication of the end was so intense that even La, standing aside, felt somewhat startled. It was only because the sun had not yet been truly destroyed, and the symbol of the world's demise had not yet reached its peak. Otherwise, even La wasn't sure how powerful Apep could become. Roar! The roaring sound, like a dragon, like a serpent, speckles of golden light emerged from the belly of Apep. The sun was still struggling, and from the perspective of a god, it was as if the black snake was emerging from the sea with the great day in its mouth. Immeasurable in height, unending in length, colossal waves rose from the primordial water, and with each moment, the great serpent that swallowed the sky and devoured the earth grew more formidable, bringing every existence in front of it into its mouth. Roar! The deep sound carried a hint of joy, and in that instant, Apep felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. It was as if the reason for its existence was about to be fulfilled. Its eternal and monotonous serpent life had reached perfection. But in the next moment, a sensation of tearing spread from the head of the serpent, and the clenched snake heads were forced apart. With an enraged stare, Apep swallowed hard. Whatever had entered its mouth, it would not let out. Rip! Like the peeling of old leather, cracks gradually appeared along the edges of the serpent's snout. The jaws that ought to have closed were forced open little by little, and then widened further. It was like a battle of gods and demon gods, but Apep was at a clear disadvantage. Even though the spectacle of destruction between the worlds was constantly enhancing its power, as long as the 8 primordial spirits still existed, the world was far from the brink of destruction. Felt like just a moment, yet it seemed to last very long. At a certain point, Apep finally reached its limit. Along the seam between the upper and lower jaws, the sound of flesh tearing apart echoed over the primordial water. Screams of agony transmitted incessantly as the massive serpent's body split in two. Roar! Swish! The sun that had been swallowed by the great serpent leapt out, dotted with black spots. But at this moment, no one cared about the sun. La's gaze was fully locked on the body of the outer god. Tearing Apep's body apart was indeed a display of strength. But La knew that the reason this world-destroying demon god had left all the sun gods of the ages at a loss was not simply because of its might, but because it was undying. It had no concept of godhood, no concept of spirit, lacking the Ka and Ba that all Egyptian gods possessed. It was the embodiment of chaos itself, the physical representation of the destruction of all things. La had no way to annihilate it, wondering if the worlds outside had such power. Hiss! Hiss! The entity split in two, with the previously engulfed sun escaping to ascend, but the ferocity of Apep remained unchanged. Or rather, as the world deteriorated and its power surged, it even began to lose the little instinct it had left. The mightier the entity, the harder it is to maintain personality. The closer to the source power, the more it becomes assimilated by it. Without even a moment's pause, the torn body sections automatically regenerated amidst roiling dark mists, turning into 2 black snakes biting upwards. The gap between itself and the deity in front of it was glaringly obvious, yet it only thought of destruction, whether it was the destruction of others or itself. Boom! Primordial water raised a huge wave, seeming to signal the outbreak of a long-lasting struggle between gods and demon gods. Amon-Ra watched from the sidelines, seeing his 2 greatest enemies fight each other before the final battle was, in a way, not a bad thing. However, in the next instant, La's expression suddenly tightened. The scene that unfolded before him was indeed beyond his expectations. In the 4th layer of the spirit realm, the all-spirit realm, black and white hues spun indeterminately. The well of reincarnation stood tall at the center of the world. The river of oblivion meandered, countless spirits within it stripped of memory, undergoing judgment, and then reincarnated anew. As one of the 3 innate rivers of the underworld with partial authority, much like Styx continually drew strength from vows, it was also gaining something from the settled memories. The most precious treasure of these beings nurtured it constantly, allowing it to become as powerful as its neighbors. Standing beside the well of reincarnation, Erinis, the deity of autumn and the end, performed her duties as usual. Specks of divine light fell in all directions, and the dead souls were accordingly reincarnated following the standard. Since their memories had already been washed away, There was no struggle or reluctance, and the scene was one of quiet serenity. Whoosh, 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 With a change in expression, Irene's eyes sharpened. The waters of the River of Oblivion suddenly churned unnaturally, catching her attention in an instant. In the current all-spirit realm, only the River of Oblivion was connected to the outside world. All other channels of communication had long been sealed. This unusual fluctuation was likely a harbinger of outsiders. Whoosh! The river water slapped against the riverbed, with countless uncertain souls sinking and floating within it. Irene's made a decisive move, trying to link her will to samsara. Chapter 7:14. Casting the Sword, _2. In the all-spirit realm, the three goddesses who wield the reincarnation scepter had no fear of any enemy. Not even if the divine king from the outer realms himself should come. He would merely be suppressed by the power of the entire spirit realm and then easily subdued before the well of reincarnation. Of course, Irene's did not think the current divine king was so foolish as to sneak into the spirit realm in secret. Irene's consciousness soon touched upon that reincarnation power permeating the all-spirit realm, the very place that had given birth to them. With every contact with this vast and endless strength, she found herself utterly intoxicated, regardless of whatever changes occurred in the River of Oblivion. She could, "What is happening? The well is empty." Her expression changed as Irene's could hardly describe the situation she perceived. The well of reincarnation was still there, still fulfilling its duties, but in Irene's perception, it now seemed like an empty shell. Its power had long been drained, and no one knew where it had gone, and the River of Oblivion was the same. The reason it was so tumultuous was precisely that its power had been drained, yet it did not possess the essence of the great divine power. As a result, the countless souls in the river caused it pressure, preventing it from maintaining its calm and quiet. Huff! Taking a deep breath, the panic was but a momentary flicker, as Irene's quickly came to her senses. This was the spirit realm, and the well of reincarnation was a sacred artifact of the Genesis artifact level. Even if all the great divine powers in the world were to practice on it, it would be impossible for them to silently extract all its power without a trace in the spirit realm. Therefore, the source of all this was clearly not in need of questioning. Right now, she just needed to fulfill her duties. Quill! With a light command, Irene stepped upon the River of Oblivion. The boiling river water was immediately quelled under her, and at least from the surface, everything appeared to have returned to calm. Nobody in the heart of the spirit realm noticed the changes, for spirit moons hung in the sky, illuminating countless lost souls in the all-spirit realm. Hemenu, primordial water. Far across the horizon, Apep's movements never ceased. With no hesitation, the bisected twin serpents attacked once more the moment they split. An aura of destroying all things circulated around it, a mission with which it was born. However, the next moment before Apep, a drop of essence in the extreme appeared out of nowhere. Acting on instinct, the great serpent swallowed it without hesitation. It might have been a trap, but it lacked the intelligence to recognize one and saw no need to discern its nature. As an undying demon god, there was nothing in this world that could truly harm it. So with a big gulp, the liquid was swallowed by Apep. And then, in an instant, under the influence of some power, Apep seemed to forget where it was and what it was about to do. It suddenly calmed down as if no longer a threat. Only the drop of liquid inside it began to rapidly diminish. It couldn't control Apep for long, and in no time, the undying demon god would awaken and respond to the world with even greater ferocity. But to a god, this was enough. Reaching out to grasp the separated serpents, they were fused back into one. Sacred flames ignited in his palm, scorching the body of the bewildered great serpent. The scales gradually took on a metallic sheen, and a black aura seeped into the serpent's spine. Hemenu's world began to shake as if outraged by the outer god's actions. Watching this scene, Ra beside him was surprised but also somewhat perplexed. The other party could make Apep lose consciousness, which was indeed astonishing, but what was he doing now? Was he forging divine artifacts? That seemed somewhat ludicrous. If Apep's existence could be eroded by such simple means, then why had they allowed it to exist till this day? Apep was undying, and only by eroding its will could there be a chance to eliminate it. Otherwise, any action was meaningless. But can its spirit be destroyed with just such a simple method? However, regardless of the reason, after only a moment's hesitation, La immediately raised his hand. The sun radiated an incomparably intense glow, its majesty undiminished even by the smattering of dark spots that lingered upon it. The great day, like a weapon, was thrown mercilessly in the direction of the outer god. The golden disk cut across the sky, its trajectory reflected on the surface of the water. La-Atom merged at the center of the sun, with the Benben stone suspended above his head. The outer god was up close, and this visitor from beyond had transfigured Apep's snakehead into a sword hilt and its body into a scabbard. But La knew that if Apep awoke, all of this would be futile. Even if the outer god could bind its form, they couldn't constrain its will or make it serve their purposes. Bring it on! Clang! A sword split it down the middle, cleaving into the core of the sun. La-Atom looked at the black sword piercing his chest, his expression neither sad nor happy. It had to be said, this thing was quite powerful, and it seemed the outer god had incorporated the powers of death and destruction from their world, using them as a core to dominate Apep's strength. However, La could also sense that the will within the sword seemed to be showing signs of awakening under the direct stimulation of the sun. Is it meaningful? No, it is not. If the outer god did all of this just to have a method to kill the sun with one strike, then La-Atom must confess it plays right into his hands. Indeed, as the sun's archenemy, Apep's power dealt special damage to the sun, and he, despite being gravely wounded by this combined strike of the outer god and Apep, found it to be exactly what he desired, didn't he? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as La-Atom reached out his hand, grasping the black sword that had pierced his chest. His palm was easily cut, and as the sun was grievously wounded, the black sword seemed to draw an even more potent force of destruction from all things. Yet facing all this, La-Atom simply took a step forward. Gravely wounded, I'll not be of much use in the upcoming battle. Therefore, for the great world of Hemenu, as Egypt's son, I choose to perish with my foe. It seemed like he was trying to convince himself, but more likely he was speaking to the world. In the face of such a formidable enemy, any price paid for victory is reasonable. So, in an instant, liquid magma spilled out from the sun, igniting blood-red flames, as if it were the sun god's own fiery blood. La-Atom himself was set ablaze as well, and the entire sun resembled a bomb about to detonate. The tremors in Hemenu grew more intense. Such acts of self-destruction by a deity would never be permitted by it if there were no external threat, but now it appeared to be sending off its offspring. Meanwhile, in Amonaray's perception, a power many times more formidable than before was surging towards him, while conversely, the constraints of the world's law on him had lessened by more than a notch. If the sun were destroyed, only the 8 primordial spirits carrying all creation and a few fragments of divine authority would remain, which would bring catastrophic consequences to it. It's a good thing he had slain that mortal earlier, slowing the assault from the alien realm. Otherwise, Amun-Ra even doubted that if the alien realm had continued its previous madly powerful onslaught against the will of Hemenu, the world would no longer be able to withstand the attack from the alien realm once the sun fell. At that moment, the world's barriers would be shattered, the main body dismembered. In an extremely short time on a cosmic scale, Hemenu would be swallowed by the other side. Neither he nor the outer god could ever rest. Suddenly sensing something, a shock went through LA's heart. In that case, his killing of the mortal seems not only beneficial to himself. So if the outer god had predicted his prediction, then might it also know that he could actually become stronger from the world's ruin. Chapter 7:15 God says 40 days. Far from the heart of Egypt, an old pastoral plain lay. Under the eternal darkness, a long serpent composed of torches slowly writhed across the land. Occasionally, a torch would suddenly extinguish, sparking a minor chaos, but calm was quickly restored. A few hundred meters from the serpent, a small storm raged unpredictably. Meanwhile, a kilometer away, hail descended from the sky. The whole world seemed like a game with glitched programming, where the codes simulating the climate were riddled with flaws. In such circumstances, unless reset, it would be unlikely for anyone to restore it to its original state. Yet, no matter how dire the situation, remnants of humanity on Earth continued, with all spirits striving to survive. There were black cats hunting in the night, and jackals lurking in the darkness, launching stealth attacks. Without light, the group could not move forward or gather together. With light, it attracted moths to the flames, constantly rushing towards hope. Casualties were inevitable, as was chaos. However, after several months, the adaptable humans had grown accustomed to this situation. They had found ways to survive, much like the ancient people living in the wilderness had. Prophet, as per your instructions, we are almost there. What should we do about the road ahead? Close to the front of the line, a flare of light moved from the front to the back. Shortly after, Aaron saw one of the leaders he had appointed. The migrating group was still too large, and even after numerous deaths and injuries, there were still many people left. In such a scenario, it was impossible for him alone to manage everything, hence the emergence of these leaders. Fortunately, Aaron's authority within the group remained unquestioned. Even though Mess had died and no longer wielded power to intimidate, they were still willing to follow Aaron's lead. After all, the more desperate people were, the more they craved hope. The more powerless they felt, the more they looked up to deity. The sun was dead, and the millennia-old faith of Egypt had been shattered. In this dire situation, they had no other choice. Aaron had witnessed firsthand how many people initially chose reluctantly, only to become devout followers later. God's salvation was their only light in the darkness. Even if they knew this might be just a response to their desperation, they still refused to let go. On reflection, Aaron himself was no different. Just wait and see, I will personally go up the mountain with Mess. You all wait at the foot of the mountain to avoid offending the Almighty God. Rest assured, Mess once received divine revelation here, accepting the decrees amid flames. Even though he was betrayed and killed by the faithless Pharaoh, God still cared for him. All the way here, when the sun had not yet extinguished, the pursuing Egyptians made the Hebrews suffer again. Only when the eternal darkness fell did the pursuit finally come to an end. The sun has been extinguished. That was the principal god of the Egyptians, the god Ra, who sat high in the heavens, surveying all directions. Taking a deep breath, Aaron noticed many people looking towards him. Facing their expectant eyes, just like every time before, Aaron proclaimed loudly, "This is God's punishment. God retributes upon the foreigners, bringing suffering to their gods and people. He is the protector of the Hebrews. He will ensure the oppressors receive their due retribution. Forward, under God's gaze, the devout shall be redeemed." Whether they believed or not, at that moment the crowd around Aaron was indeed inspired. Or perhaps they also sincerely hoped that all this was real. Endless darkness, endless silence. A step faster than Aaron, the moment his life was ended by Pharaoh's sword, Mess found himself in a space that seemed isolated from the world. He did not know where this was, whether it was the afterlife or the gap between life and death. However, in the darkness, Mess could faintly sense some external information. He watched as his body was placed on a pyre, yet it remained uncorrupted. He watched Aaron guide the Hebrews southward, heading towards Midian. He saw the pursuing Egyptians, and he also saw the extinguished sun. But he could only silently watch, as an observer witnessing everything unfold. Being in this realm, Mess distinctly felt the power that he once commanded. It was a mighty power beyond the mortal world, capable of easily solving all the troubles Aaron encountered. But for some reason, there seemed to be shackles between him and that intimately connected power, preventing him from touching it. Is this what I have forsaken? Even though no one explained to him, Mess suddenly rose with a sense of enlightenment. You will forsake the future, forsake eternal life, forsake everything you possess, and undergo the disasters inflicted by their God along with your people. Those who do not believe in me shall perish, and even the devout shall suffer calamities. This was originally his glory and right. If he had followed God's will, acting merely as a messenger of God rather than as a prophet of the Hebrews, then all this would have belonged to him. But he voluntarily relinquished these, returning them to God. Now that he was dead, they were rightfully reclaimed. So, from the moment he lost his life, his first covenant with God was already fulfilled. God had obliterated the 9 pillars of Egypt and allowed the Hebrews to continue living on this earth. He fulfilled his promise. Those on earth receive earthly chastisements. Those in heaven receive celestial punishments. Whatever they inflict upon you shall be retribution upon them and their gods. And now, it was naturally Mes's turn to fulfill his promise. Chapter 7:16 God says 40 days _2. Yet despite realizing all this, Mes became even more anxious and frightened. For besides these, he also remembered what God had last spoken. This world is not yours. Therefore, you must go to the place that belongs to you. You must leave here, go to the end of the sea. Before, he had thought it was an easy task. Once free from the gods of Egypt and the Pharaoh's pursuit, with the strength bestowed by God, this journey could easily be completed. Thus, even though God did not promise, you shall surely return to where you came from, back to the place I have promised you. Mes still believed it was not an issue. Until now, he had been killed. His killer was not a man, but the sun. The sun thus fell, yet he could not be resurrected. Only at this moment, he felt as if everything had been arranged from the beginning. His choices, his sacrifices, all and everything, were within the future ordained by God. In the darkness, Mes saw Aaron ascending the mountain holding his body, the same mountain he had once ascended while shepherding in Midian. But Mes knew his covenant with God had already ended. Aaron would not achieve what he desired, for Mes had not told them that God's gaze never lingered on the Hebrews. So, do you regret it? Whoosh! Startling awake, Mes felt he opened his eyes. The surrounding darkness vanished, and he seemed to return to the day he had seen God. Layers upon layers of worlds bullied beneath him, with 7 vast layers of light and shadow flashing in between. As if standing at the center of the cosmos, Mes once again saw that shadow beyond all worlds. He lay prostrate on the ground, expressing his devotion and humility to God. God! Merely in a glance, even though God did not explain, Mes understood why he had come here. His first covenant with God was over. He had gambled his life and everything. But now God told him that he was different from others. His life was not just one portion. His covenant with God naturally could happen a second time. He had always known he was different. After all, God never shied away from his focus. He also personally told Mes that he was different. Just that until today, Mes did not know in what way he was different. It was only after his death, feeling that power transcending the mortal world, that he began to guess. But a guess is still a guess, like a blind man feeling an elephant. He could not see the whole picture. What he could see was just a corner of the truth. Yet, standing here now, even though God did not speak, he just knew. Mes was his name as a mortal, but he could have 2 names not of the mortal realm. One called Pallas, another called Horus. They belonged to 2 sanctities, to 2 rulers of the land and the sky, although this rule was of the future, not the present. One had died before it was born. One was meant to be born but was born by another in his stead. However, these 2 names would settle upon Mes and upon the Hebrews. In the destiny of Egypt, Horus was the offspring of Osiris and Isis. In the destiny of chaos, Pallas was the descendant of the deceased Zeus. So, as long as the rest of the Hebrews died out, then their material life would end, and their lineage with it. Mes needed to do nothing. He would naturally gather all the scattered power, becoming the existence destined to inherit the future divine king status of both worlds. This was why God specially focused on him, and why he could still stand here. At this moment, Mes understood God's meaning. He had paid with a life and fate, paying the price for his past choices. God let him personally experience all this, telling him the ugliness of humanity. God let him experience the immense power he was meant to possess, showing him the indelible divide between the gods of Egypt and mortals. Perhaps God knew he would be killed, yet he still allowed Mes to experience this process on his own. Now, by asking him, "Do you regret it?" God was also asking him if he had given up. As long as he admitted surrender, even with just a fragment of his life and fate remaining, he could still survive. God might even restore what he had taken away, allowing him to carry on his destined role. If Mes nodded, agreeing to forsake his kin, God would bring great calamities from the heavens, annihilating the remaining people, regardless of their devotion or lack thereof. Mes would ascend to the heavens, inheriting the noble and sacred destiny of standing before the Lord as an angel, to spread his eternal glory across all worlds. Therefore, Mes looked up and gave his answer. "I do not regret." Crack. It was like thunder streaking across the sky, or perhaps just an illusion of Mes' own making. God was still there, but he seemed much more distant. Perhaps he had always been that distant. After all, God is all-knowing and omnipresent, and he should know everything. So the decision I make today, could it also be within God's expectations? From the kingdom of God, Mes seemed still able to see Aaron on the mountain and the Hebrews kneeling in prayer for success below. He knew these people might not all be kind or devout. Given a chance, they too might commit sins. Even placed in his position, they might not hesitate to make another choice. Yet Mes did not hesitate, for his choice to save them was never for their gratitude. "I offer everything to you, Almighty Lord. I give you all that I have, from the past to the future, though it all originates from you." Chanting softly, Mes' calm voice echoed through the universe. "May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please allow me to return to the mortal realm, to guide your faithful back to the land you promised us." Without looking up, Mes seemed once again to see God, standing outside of time, smiling at him. He was making a promise to Mes and also consoling him. He promised Mes the time he would spend walking in the mortal realm and gave him one last chance to repent. "I grant you 40 days from east to west, from south to north. You and your people will cross the great sea, returning to the old land. When the final day arrives, you shall look upon my mountain. All who see it may reach it, all but you. You will stop there, on the last day before the return. This is the fate of your future. You may refuse, but if this is what you desire," God said, "I make a covenant with you. 1 day in the heavens, 1 year on earth." Since the fall of the first pillar god, time in Hemenu has already become chaotic. Initially, time slowed down with a decade passing as 1 year. As the end drew near, this slowdown became even more noticeable. But perhaps due to the successive falls of the 9 pillar gods, when the sun also went out, time in the mortal realm was no longer restrained. It returned to its original pace, even speeding up slightly. So much so, that though the battle in the heavens had not lasted long, a considerable amount of time had already passed on earth. So when Aaron began to ascend the mountain, the primordial water and the sun had not yet extinguished. As the second covenant was established, the great day was just about to break free. Endless light shone anew upon the land. It then split into 2, completely shattered and disappeared in Hemenu's world. On the vast water only Amun-Ra remained, and opposite him, the god holding the black sword. Chapter 7:17. This is invincible in the world. Finally, even this last piece is now complete. The surface of the water was vast and waveless, and as Ariadam completely perished, Amun-Ra heaved a faint sigh. Witnessing the sun being torn asunder and then falling into the domain of the outer gods, a sense of inexplicable feeling stirred within him. In an instant, the whole world began to tremble, to mourn. Waves rose upon the primordial waters as if bidding farewell to the sun that had once risen from their depths. Yet at the same moment, as the once familiar entity vanished without a trace, the unease in Amun-Ra's heart gradually dissipated, leaving behind a trace of relief. The outer gods are, after all, outer gods, and no one can judge their actions. La couldn't guarantee that they would definitely destroy the sun, but fortunately, they ultimately could not resist the temptation to devour the sun and completely annihilated the great day of this world. This was the most significant authority next to that of the 8 primordial spirits of Hemenu, now lost to the alien realm. But if the world was inevitably doomed, then whether it was lost or not was really just a matter of time. La wasn't worried about this, nor concerned that the outer gods would gain significant strength from this. On one hand, in the face of the complete absolute void, the addition of the sun's power to his enemies truly carried little significance. On the other hand, unlike the authorities of the other pillar gods, the sun's magnitude was indeed monumental. Even the alien realm that eroded Hemenu would not be able to assimilate such a grand-level power in a short time. No matter how powerful the outer gods were, they could not be compared to the entirety of their alien realm. They would either need an opportunity or they would require a sufficiently long time to gradually wear down and assimilate it. In any case, it wouldn't be immediate, thus irrelevant to the imminent destruction of the world. At that moment, Amon-Ra smiled a heartfelt smile. With the fall of the sun, he clearly felt a great change within himself. The absolute void was finally perfected within him, its dual aspects of yin and yang unified within his being. This was a power that should not belong to a god. After all, La knew what the so-called 8 primordial spirits really were. Though they were called gods, they were not truly deities. To be precise, they were always part of the world. In the ancient beginnings of creation, in the era before even Adam was born, the nascent world instinctively tried to possess wisdom, the most fundamental aspiration of all existence. Thus, it differentiated within its 4 basic structures, taking on different personas in the form of male and female. They totaled 8, the male deities with frog heads and female deities with serpent heads. In this manner, the world attempted to possess its own consciousness, rather than being eternally devoid of subjective will. No one knows what heights a complete living world could reach if it were innately alive. However good the intention, the outcome was obvious. The world ultimately failed, and even though it wasn't as powerful as chaos, making the quest for order slightly less difficult, it was still a complete world. Scoring 10,000 or 3,000 points on a paper that was meant to be marked out of 100 is essentially an impossibility. Such a powerful force, being naturally enduring, could not possibly possess wisdom. Thus those 8 personas existed for but a fleeting moment, then returned to the world itself. But despite failure, for beings of such high caliber, having once existed inevitably leaves traces. So even though no gods existed in that age, both Adam and La as 2 successive sun gods still knew the names of those 8 personas from the primordial waters. The mascots of the absolute void were Amon, Ammonius, and its counterpart, Amunet, Amunet. The mascots of boundless darkness were Kuk, Kuk, and Khokhet, Khokhet. The mascots of infinite space were Ha, Ha, and Ha-Hey, Ha-Hey. The mascots of the primordial waters were Nu, Nu, and Nonet, Nonet. Together they represented the world's initial basic state of concepts. Separate they were the 4 faces of the world, but together they formed a complete world, encompassing all that Hemenu was. Whether it be the sun or the many subsequent godhoods, they were just like the Benben stone and the first sun, Adam, born from it. They, too, were divinities risen from the primordial waters. Even combined, they were just progeny of the primordial waters. So if one were to understand it in the way of chaos's deity, the 4 faces represented by the 8 primordial spirits did not correspond to the primordial gods, but to the laws of this world and the rules of the outer realm. The primordial waters were like another version of the present world, most active, and the first god was born from them. However, Hemenu is far inferior to chaos, so naturally, the 8 primordial spirits could not be compared to this world. But for Amon-Ra, he had never witnessed the reality of chaos, so his point of comparison could not possibly be an existence far in an alien realm utterly unattainable. Gently lifting his hand, as if breathing in unison with the world. At this moment, the vast expanse of the void around Hemenu was in La's perception. Everywhere the world's power reached, his will could extend there. Even to the distant ends of the void, he was no exception. Chapter 7:18. This is unrivaled in the world, _2. From a distance, La seemed to see the vast chaos world encircled by the circumterrestrial river. There, too, were the sun, the moon, and the stars, as well as all spirits and creatures. Of course, there were great beings above the true gods, struggling for power within it. And some of those beings, at this moment, noticed his gaze. They were enemies. He was constantly reminded by the power bestowed by the world. He could even see that the force of the alien realm was about to boil over again, recklessly crashing into Hemenu's sea of origin like before, tearing it apart, dividing it. This was also LA's duty after being granted power. Absolute void was always the outermost layer of the world's four barriers. Facing such an impact, he was naturally the first in line. However, it's about time. Now let's end this game. With a low chuckle as a collapsing building, La naturally wouldn't choose to sink with the ship. The power of the Egyptian gods could ultimately be transferred and devoured by one another because it was bestowed by the world, and if the world wished to reclaim it, they had no power to resist. So at this moment, La clearly saw on the mortal world below, the mortal he had killed was resurrected, but he had no intention of stopping it. Who decreed that the absolute void on the outermost layer must directly face the force of the alien realm? La certainly didn't think so. The emperor can revoke the power granted to officials at any time, but if the dynasty itself has crumbled, then who's left to issue such a reclaim order? The answer is no one. Resisting foreign entities is resistance, whether it's against the alien realm or the outer gods. Those with wisdom can discern the difference between the two sides, but the rules of the world are probably not yet so adaptable. To ward off the external, one must first ensure internal stability. In an instant, from an external viewpoint, one could seemingly see Hemenu's boundless spacetime expand and then contract. Anchoring existence and non-existence, the power suppressing the void retracted in a flash. Standing atop the primordial water, La even felt he could cleave open this source that had birthed the sun. Even the potent outer gods seemed no more than this. All their schemes and planning were insignificant before absolute strength. But I must be careful not to strike too hard. What if I kill you outright? Then what would I do? The thought flickered through LA's mind, his expression neither sad nor joyful. At this point, all that remained was a direct strategy. Unless the outer god could manipulate world-class forces, no matter how much it had prepared, it would be in vain. The spirit realm, the seventh layer. Within the belly of Mount Sinai, at an unnamed pond. It's called a pond, but in fact, this is a reflection of the core of the spirit realm. When the spirit realm was first opened, many divine artifacts were nurtured here. But as they were born one by one, the place emptied. However, today there were some changes. As with the shaking of the void, an uninvited guest arrived above the pond. It was a light body whose brightness was gradually extinguishing, or more precisely, a miniaturized sun. The forces of death and the end slowly eroded it, while powers of resurrection and rebirth instinctively activated within, resisting these changes. Hovering between life and death, even upon arriving at this core of the spirit realm, it could not be completely assimilated momentarily. Just like the remnants of the 9 realms from before, even for an intact world, eroding such a force takes time, all the more for the spirit realm. But now no one cared about it anyway. The sun, the omnipotent Lord, has reclaimed yet another portion of power. One day, he will return to the beginning of all things and let mortals know that he is the start and the end of everything. Walking slowly by the poolside, Liana, unseen for a long time, stepped into the water that symbolized the origin of the spirit realm. The water rose over her ankles, then her knees, until at one moment, she reached the center of the pool. At the bottom of the pool, a crystal stone existed like a seal, which seemed not to contain something within but to prevent external influences. Few knew that the goddess of the nether moon, who had been missing from the world for a long time, was actually guarding it, although it hardly needed any guard. But when she knew of its existence, Liana voluntarily requested this duty, because gazing at it was like witnessing the might of the omnipotent Lord spilled into the world. It was both one and many. Open, she spoke softly, and before Liana, The crystal shattered bit by bit, revealing the item sealed and protected within. It was a water droplet, most ordinary. If not for holding partial authority over the spirit realm, even the current Liana could not tell it apart from real water. Liana! As if hearing a familiar call, she stepped forward. The goddess folded her wings behind her, cradling the water droplet in her palm. I am here. All glory to you. Above the primordial water, the demise of the sun seemed still in the previous moment. The tip of the black sword touched the Benben stone, and Apep's will began to awaken. The newly formed sword seemed poised to break apart with the awakening of its own consciousness, while nearby, on the face of the origin, Ele's power in an instant surpassed anything Lane had ever seen in the gods. Perhaps the Mother Tree was an exception, but Lane had never actually faced the complete Mother Tree. Chapter 719. This is unrivaled in the world, _3. In the remnants of the 9 realms, he was suppressed by the world's power. In the chaos world, he was sealed by it. But regardless of who was stronger or weaker, Amon-Ra truly possessed unimaginable strength at that moment. Such power was so formidable that even chaos would not leave it unchecked once it entered the world, necessitating containment and limitation. However, at that moment, although his enemies had become much stronger, even surpassing all previous foes, Lane felt indifferent. At that moment, he was immersed in a peculiar intuition. Even though his divinity and humanity had long separated, even though they didn't exist in the same world, even though his embodiment of evil thoughts still languished in the 9 hells, he felt that he was one. Time and space meant nothing. The past and the future unfolded before him. At the dawn of creation by Hemenu, Adam was born from the egg beside the Benben stone, the first son of the primordial water nun, and thus the sun came into being. But at that moment, the past and future seemed to be within his grasp. He possessed the sun and could also erase any trace that the sun had ever existed. Changing history, altering the past, no longer seemed impossible as long as he could resist the world itself that tried to maintain history. It's meaningless. The power, being of the same magnitude and possibly even stronger because it's from chaos, is still too insufficient in quantity. With a slight shake of his head and in utter silence, an inexplicable force flowed down his arm. It passed through the hilt of the demon's sword, calming it. It moved through the blade of the demon's sword, and thus, Apep's existence was completely erased from the world. Without a trace of fireworks, a great enemy that had troubled 2 generations of the sun for millions of years was just relegated to the past. The blade trembled slightly and then became even more profound. Apep was the embodiment of chaos, the symbol of destruction and the end, but what in this world comes closer to the true essence of destruction than the destruction of destruction itself? The aspects belonging to chaos were then expelled to the scabbard, leaving only pure demise on the dark blade. The inexplicable power continued downward, landing on the Benben stone, and upon contact, the divine stone that was born on the primordial water began to melt. It turned into liquid, flowing up the entire sword. Apep actually had no physical body. It was just a congregation of chaos, an echo from the early remnants of creation. Thus, the seemingly solid blade of the demon sword was just an illusion, for it was also merely a sword without substance. But now it had substance. The sole Genesis artifact of Hemenu became its material, shaped by some supreme force. As if naturally born and formed seamlessly without any trace of artificial fabrication, the demon sword was thus completed. Material, symbol, merged together, seems very potent, and indeed is potent, if only my opponents were just all gods. It seemed like a long time had passed, yet under the inexplicable power, no time had passed at all for everything. Looking at his own forged divine artifact, had it been born in this epoch, Lane would have been delighted. Such a Genesis artifact capable of ending all things would allow him to face any opponent. Even the Lord of Darkness would likely be just a matter of a few slashes. However, for what he truly wanted to do, such a sword was merely marginally better than useless. Then, in the next moment, the inexplicable power that hadn't diminished much from its previous exertions suddenly vibrated, and the newly formed blade shattered again. An intangible force enveloped it, preventing the artifact from collapsing immediately. The scene before his eyes was something Lane had planned a long time ago, only that the things he acquired in the fantasy world considerably increased the likelihood of his success. This sword was powerful, but it was not what he sought. Thus, its only fate was to become a tool to carry even greater power. This is what I desire, the death of a world. Amun-Ra was close at hand, and with the resurrection of Mes in the mortal realm, the world power of chaos surged back even more violently. The power of the absolute void was extracted by Amun-Ra. This was not merely a quarter of the world's power departing, but a gap between perfection and imperfection. If all went as expected, Hemenu would not withstand such a strike, and his death was imminent. And Lane's job was to find the perfect timing to deliver this final blow. Samsara cannot withstand this level of the end, not even the current spirit realm. Maybe by relying on that essence of high space-time power, like I control this water droplet now, I won't be erased by the power of the end, but the spirit realm would inevitably be destroyed. A world's death. Only a shell born from its own life can briefly withstand it. Alternatively, could be embraced by another world. Grasping the sword hilt, this was inevitably a sword that could only be used once in the future. But even in Lane's current state, it was unimaginable what kind of might the sword would reveal at that time. Thousands of years of erosion, internal rebels, external invaders, Lane's planning, all these piled up, chaos still took so long to face destruction. When his death burst forth in a moment, that power could likely tear everything apart. The divine seems to have arranged a little more for it. Is it the final quenching step? I even feel a bit ruthless watching it, true to the divine's choice. But since it's done, let's continue on. Slightly lifting his gaze, under the mysterious power's augmentation, all of Amun-Ra's earlier changes were vividly visible in Lane's eyes, including his impending attack. In fact, the other party wasn't wrong. The power was something even Lane had never possessed. After all, no world had bequeathed it to him, and this world still needed to be alive. Once the world died, probably not even Amun-Ra could maintain such power. It could only be said that the timing, location, and cooperation were all there, except for an overwhelming power. Clang. Drawing the sword from its scabbard, Amun-Ra's smile seemed still on his face. Yet Lane didn't even glance at him. The past conversation with the goddess of the night brushed through his mind, proving that what he wanted to do was inevitably going to succeed. What is invincible in this world? This is invincible in this world, whether describing the present or the near future. In that moment, a god raised the demon's sword as if judging all the beings under the heavens. And just like the sun a moment ago, it was before Amun-Ra. With one sword strike, all things were severed. Chapter 720. Destroying the World. Within the world, Lane raised his sword, and before him was the first thing to face: the void power of Amun-Ra. Meanwhile, outside the world, almost at the same moment, the world power originating from chaos descended once again. There was not the slightest deviation, or rather, the world power brought about by the resurrection of Mes in the mortal realm and the timing of Lane drawing his sword were inherently coordinated. If it happened a minute earlier, the main structure of the Hemenu world would have been destroyed by chaos, and the image of the end would not have fallen into his hands as he wished. If it was a minute late, then he would have been fighting against the remnants of Hemenu all by himself. Even though the strike of his sword, now enhanced by the creation force, had reached an unbelievable realm, he absolutely could not have managed this. So the timing was neither early nor late. In this battlefield of God against God, in the clash between worlds, the first forces that came into contact were those that had pierced through the endless void and overlapped with the outermost structure of Hemenu. But this time, what it collided with was not the outermost absolute void but the second layer of barrier. The boundless darkness. Whoosh! There was no specific sound because it was swallowed by the darkness. There were no traces of impact because this kind of overlap and collision was not happening within a physical structure. The boundless darkness that seemed endless was scattered and then regathered, its magnitude constantly shifting. To a world, distance meant nothing. It could be infinitely large or infinitely small. It is the world itself that defines scale. If there is no power to exceed it, the boundlessness of the boundless darkness is genuinely so. Even if one possessed eternal life and endless time, they could never walk from one end of the dark domain to the other. This was a barrier of a world safeguarding everything within. Yet, under the force of another, more powerful world, everything was rewritten. The world defines everything from nothingness. Therefore, as the power from chaos flowed through, the order originally defined by Hemenu's will was warped and altered. Just like every previous encounter, everything shrouded in darkness was easily breached, followed by the infinite space, which was equally powerless. Of course, throughout this process, chaos's power was also diminished. After all, this was an assault on an alien realm, and such a forceful attack led to greater consumption. Normal absorption between worlds should start bit by bit from the periphery, peeling away the opponent's force, eroding their traces, covering and reorganizing with one's own concepts, and finally incorporating them as part of oneself. However, striking forcefully into the core of a world was different, akin to not breaching a nation's defense but penetrating deep into its heart alone. Not only would the forces dispatched suffer continuous erosion, but the effects of the loss were also greatly limited. Unless one could directly overcome the imperial capital of the enemy, execute their emperor and ministers to leave them leaderless, such an action would be a failure. This was indeed the actual state of affairs between the two realms. Despite the fact that Chaos's power had breached 4 layers of barrier and even penetrated deep into the Sea of Origin, Hemenu was still capable of enduring for thousands of years. With 4 layers of barriers reducing the impact in succession, all gods were there to obstruct the invasion from the alien realm. What seemed a perilous situation was not truly that dangerous. But now, in a short time, everything changed. 1 less of the 4 barriers, all 9 pillars' spirit had fallen. Thus, when the power of chaos once again broke through the primordial waters, what Hemenu had left was still deadly enough. Above the Sea of Origin of Hemenu, the dark tide that had receded almost instantly covered everything again. The golden waters had almost no power to resist and were beaten back by that unceasing force. In the depths of the cosmos, the will of the world made its final struggle. Amon-Ra felt an intense urge. If he did not do something before the world shattered, he would surely be the first to die. So without further delay, Amon-Ra chose to satisfy the ultimate demand of the world. In an instant, heaven and earth changed colors. The void above the primordial waters was severed, and everything tangible and intangible entered into a state of being both existent and non-existent. Life and death overlapped, positive and negative opposed. Within the world, Lane raised his sword, and before him was the first thing to face: the void power of Amon-Ra. Meanwhile, outside the world, almost at the same moment, the world power originating from chaos descended once again. There was not the slightest deviation, or rather, the world power brought about by the resurrection of Mess in the mortal realm and the timing of Lane drawing his sword were inherently coordinated. If it happened a minute earlier, the main structure of the Hemenu world would have been destroyed by chaos, and the image of the end would not have fallen into his hands as he wished. If it was a minute late, then he would have been fighting against the remnants of Hemenu all by himself. Even though the strike of his sword, now enhanced by the creation force, had reached an unbelievable realm, he absolutely could not have managed this. So the timing was neither early nor late. In this battlefield of God against God, in the clash between worlds, the first forces that came into contact were those that had pierced through the endless void and overlapped with the outermost structure of Hemenu. But this time, what it collided with was not the outermost absolute void but the second layer of barrier: the boundless darkness. Chapter 721. Apocalypse_2. Whoosh! There was no distinct sound because it was swallowed by the darkness. There were no traces of impact because this kind of overlapping collision was not happening on any tangible material structure. The endless darkness was scattered and then gathered again, its size constantly changing. For the world, distance had no meaning. It could be infinitely large or infinitely small. It was the world itself that defined size, and without a force surpassing it, the boundlessness of boundless darkness was genuine. Even if a person had eternal life and endless time, he would never be able to walk from one side of the dark domain to the other. This barrier was one of the world, protecting everything within it. However, under the force of another, more powerful world, everything was rewritten. The world defined everything from nothing, so where the power from chaos flowed, the order once defined by Hemenu's will was twisted and corrupted. Just like every previous time, everything shrouded in darkness was easily breached, followed by infinite space as well. Of course, in the process, chaos's power was also reduced. After all, this was an alien realm, and such forceful attacks brought greater losses. The normal annexation between worlds should start little by little from the periphery, stripping the opponent's power, eroding their traces, overlaying and reorganizing with one's own concepts, and finally making it a part of oneself. But such a forceful intrusion into the core of a world is different, just like not breaking through a country's border defense but deep penetration into its heart. Not only would one's dispatched power continually be reduced, but the effects of the losses were also very limited. Unless one could directly conquer the enemy's imperial capital, slay the emperor and his ministers, leaving them headless, this would be a failed operation. This was also the actual situation of the battle between the two realms previously. Although Chaos's power had already breached 4 barriers and even reached deep into the Sea of Origin, Hemenu was actually still able to hold on for thousands of years. With 4 barriers successively reducing it, all gods then blocked the alien realm's offensive at the end. Although the situation seemed precarious, it was not that dangerous. But now, in a short time, everything had changed. 1 less barrier among the 4, all 9 pillars' spirit had fallen. So when Chaos's power once again breached the primordial waters, what remained of it was still lethal. Above the Sea of Origin of Hemenu, the receding tide of darkness was suddenly covered again in an instant. The golden seawater had almost no resistance, retreating step by step under the endless onslaught. In this inscrutable moment, the worlds will struggled for the last time. Amon-Ra felt a strong urgency. If he did nothing soon, he would surely be the first to die before the world shattered. So without further delay, for the world's final request, Amon-Ra chose to fulfill it. In an instant, the heavens and earth changed colors. The void above the primordial waters was severed, and all things tangible and intangible entered a state between existence and non-existence. Life and death overlapped, positive and negative opposed each other. If researchers of later ages saw this scene, they might think they had seen the truth. However, all these phenomena were just the fringe manifestations of the absolute void in material form. All things return to the void. This is the power of the world. With arms outstretched, Amon-Ra faced the sword blade that seemed to end the world. He was now clear on the power of the outer god, and he understood Apep's capabilities more than ever. The power of the 8 primordial spirits was so formidable, yet now he held it in his palm. After today, he would be reborn. Swoosh! There was a sound, yet it was as if there wasn't. Without any pause, the demon's sword swept through, severing everything in front of it. LA's arms were cut off at the elbows, a sudden and inexplicable sense of horror surging in his heart. Wisps of black air spiraled, empowered by some unimaginable force. The power that tangled around the severed area seemed to possess an incredible might, rendering all of LA's original powers ineffective. In an instant, Amon-Ra felt as if his very existence was being erased, with past and future becoming indistinct. He did not understand what this was, nor did he understand the creation force. He just felt incomprehension. What is this situation? If you have such power, what were you actually fighting me with before? Why is this? Confusion and incomprehension, even outweighing fear and anger. If he also had this power, why wait until today? So since you could achieve this step, what were you doing before? Bang! The figure exploded, La trying to save himself. Black air swirled. He tried to expel all parts contaminated by the black air. But when he reassembled his form in the distance, he still felt that overwhelming sense of impending doom approaching. The infinite might at the pinnacle of great divine power seemed to be of no use. The reason La could still struggle was only because when he had fully grasped the endless void, Some properties from the world also came to him. But intuition told him that if this continued, as that power spread further to him, he would ultimately pay a heavier price. This price was not death, but it was equally profound. And the only reason it wasn't death was because that sword was not aimed at him. The sword fell, its force splitting the primordial waters, and the aftermath severed LA's arms and the mortal world. Chapter 722, World Destruction _3. Above the Sea of Origin, the black tide was endless, having cornered the last part of Hemenu into a corner. The protracted struggle between the worlds was about to end, but at this moment, the demon's sword appeared above this space. The tip of the sword drooped as the now insignificant golden ocean trembled slightly. It seemed to have realized that its death was inevitable, whether it came from the black sword or from an attack from the alien realm. I will end you, but I also promise you, whoever has caused you harm, people shall be punished by people, gods by gods, and the world, it too will face the world's punishment. And what I need is the might to do all this. The demon's sword fell, striking into the heart of Hemenu in the final moment. That drop, already considerably depleted of creation force, burned up instantly. In fact, even to deliver the final blow, only it could inflict true meaning upon the harm done to a world. Lane didn't know whether his promise had any effect. After all, the world had no wisdom of its own. But at least the sword strike did not encounter any mishap. It indeed ended Hemenu's life. Of course, this did not mean that the world was completely devoid of any strength. In fact, it was like the remnants of the 9 realms. Even in death, its remaining strength was still considerable. But as a whole, Hemenu ceased to exist from then on. What was left could hardly be called Hemenu, but rather lifeless limbs and severed parts. Boom! Space-time froze for an instant, followed by an explosion within and without the mortal realm and the endless void. The world once merged together now began to separate. The remnants of the 9 realms yesterday seemed to be its future. But all of this had nothing to do with Lane anymore. Holding the demon's sword, in his perception at this moment, the original creation force had been completely depleted. But at this moment, a new force of the same essence began to grow within it. Unlike before, the new force didn't have that sense of omnipotence. It couldn't create everything, it couldn't determine order, and it had none of the mysterious aspects. There was only pure death and an end, a curse and erasure of all things. And from the moment of its birth, it began to expand and multiply madly. In the first instant, it was but a wisp. In the second, it had already grown to the volume of the previous drop of creation force. The third instant, the fourth, the fifth, as if there was no end in sight. Holding the demon's sword in hand felt like raising the end of time. At this moment, Lane even had an illusion. If he were to strike down now, would it sever the connection between Chaos and Hemenu, keeping the two from being connected anymore? It probably can't. Even when it was alive, it couldn't break free from Chaos, let alone after its death. Dismissing the unrealistic thoughts in his mind, Lane felt that, as the last drop of creation force was used up, his consciousness also began to separate anew. But after reorganization and separation, he seemed to have discovered something. My humanity and divinity are both purer, yet not pure enough. Because how could my own strength truly separate me from myself? C3 to 162. This was something Lane had foreseen when he took this step. Now he was just confirming it again. In fact, this had proven that his approach was correct, just not successful enough. But that was a matter for later. At the moment, holding the demon's sword, its true casting process was about to begin. The collision of the world's corpse with the power of Chaos was the hammer. The more completely Hemenu died, the more powerful the demon's sword became. Of course, although it would be best not to unsheath it before it was properly forged, in the meantime, Lane could still use it to gain some advantages for himself. For instance, as one of its materials, the link between the Benben stone and the primordial waters persisted to this very day. This endless expanse of water might be the spoils of war of Chaos, but it was also destined to be the demon's sword's, and indeed, his own. No one could claim it in entirety. This was an indisputable reality. Once more raising the sword, he plunged it into the abyss below. The demon sword began to absorb the power of the primordial waters, to carry the increasingly monumental symbol of world destruction. At the same time, along some connection in the fifth layer of the spirit realm, changes began to brew as well. Besides, the last trouble is you. Turning to gaze in the direction of La, he found that the other party had not been able to escape the traces left by the sword just now. The force of death bolstered by the creation force was like a persistent disease in the bone, relentlessly eroding everything of his. Even with the extinction of the world, the power on Amanere's body also began to tremble incessantly. Hey! Is this what you wanted from the beginning? Noticing Lane's gaze, La ceased to struggle. He no longer possessed that invincible aura, but how much better could LA's state be at this moment? Seemingly aware of his inevitable doom, La instead became calm. He wanted to know the causes and consequences, but to this, Lane just smiled. Being able to reach this step while the world perishes, you are indeed hard to kill. But at least as La, this is our first conversation and it will also be the last. In this world, there is no need for an all-seeing, all-knowing God La. To ensure the ability to obliterate the world's last struggle in one hit, Lane naturally could not invest too much of his power in La conveniently. As the world was being destroyed, the other part no longer had that kind of power. The god of absolute void from absolute void was the prey of chaos. For those things unrelated to it, Lane could at most glean a little from the edges. But the part belonging to La he would not let go of a single bit. Extending his right hand, the forces eroding La through an invisible connection became instantly active.
Chapter 723 en La.
Mortal realm. A sword fell and all things were divided. Let's not mention the world of Egypt after it met its demise, but under the demon sword of the apocalypse, the land of the mortal world truly shattered into fragments, both big and small. The land was cleaved, the rivers were severed. Some were scattered loosely, their cycles completely dissolved, and all life therein perished. Only a few larger shards could still maintain a bit of an ecosystem, and if they could merge with chaos before everything fell apart, there was still a sliver of life force remaining. Among these shards, the largest one was undoubtedly what used to be the heart of Egypt, now known to later generations as the Nile Delta. With the world's dissolution, compared to other regions' decay, this birthplace of Egypt seemed to have been reborn with some new greenery. The blood hues in the Nile water gradually faded, and Egypt's mother river revived with a newfound vitality. The ancient river was revived because its master had returned. The gods of Egypt were never just those few. The 9 pillar gods were only the ones with the highest status and stronger power. When the disaster struck, they, along with the 9 pillar gods, were pulled into the Sea of Origin but did not manage to retain their conscious awareness, losing their last chance at salvation. But when Hemenu was completely destroyed, some holders of godhood perished with him, while others, such as the Nile god, managed to escape with their lives. After all, the Nile was still there, so as Hapi, who possessed certain traits of a territorial god, naturally survived as well. The Nile god, who had merely escaped by chance, did not die but fell into the deepest slumber. Even if he could not reach a new world, he would never have the chance to awaken again. In this situation, no matter how many sacrificial rites the surviving Egyptians held, no matter how many times they prayed for divine favor, they naturally received no response. They could only see the river water returning to clarity, but the river god of the mother river never responded to their prayers. Recalling the river water that had been dyed red with blood, various suspicions inevitably spread among the people. But the Egyptians of this moment had no other recourse, as human power was so insignificant compared to the forces of the world. They could only continuously perform sacrifices on the banks of the Nile, praying for a divine response. Ding! Yong! Ding! Dong! The bell rang, heralding the prelude to another grand sacrifice. Donning the ornaments on his robe, Qasim grasped his staff tightly. Come, put it on me. With hands spread open, the Egyptian high priest let his disciple place the last badge that marked his identity on his chest. Compared to before, he looked much thinner, as though he could step towards the end of his life at any moment, yet his eyes still shone brightly. "Father, the news has come." Pharaoh Ramses II was bathed in heavenly fire, his life and death unknown. Even the land seems to have reached its end as well. Speaking in a low voice, Ibu's eyes were full of worry. Not long ago, the formerly absent sun appeared briefly before disappearing once again, and the darkness on the land had continued for countless days and nights. Wave after wave of messengers were sent to contact Memphis, but only yesterday did they receive a single response. The pharaoh personally went to the newly built Sun City, turned into a speck of light among the golden flames. The army stationed outside the city chased after the fleeing Hebrews, then disappeared without trace. The leaderless city burst into chaos, and without supplies from outside the city, people fought desperately over food and water, resulting in countless casualties. Moreover, most frightening of all, the land that was once connected seemed divided, and some had found the edge of the earth. Beyond the edge was the empty void, and no one knew what happened there. "Father, this situation, it's simply as if everything were already dead, right?" Speaking faintly, Qasim interrupted Ibu's words. "Yes, father." It was the best adjective, yet Ibu braced himself for his father's reprimand. He had told his father about similar visions more than once, but he had never received approval. He thought this time would be the same, but to his surprise, Qasim said nothing. He merely looked over his attire, then glanced at his student and son before him. It seemed as if he smiled. Then Qasim spoke. "Let's go. Va, at this time, we need faith to calm the hearts of the people." We turned from fear to awe. As your son, in the role of the Lord, teaches the lands of Egypt. Shine, shine, Nile, shine on. With your herds, you nourish life. With your pastures, you feed the bulls. Shine on, Nile, in your glory. Another grand ceremony. It should have taken place at noon, but now the mortal realm has no sun. The water of the Nile should have carried away the sacrifices, but now it remained as calm as ever. As the ceremony concluded, watching the unchanged sky and land, the crowd fell into a silent despondency. High priest. Suddenly, as if he had hesitated for a long time, someone from the procession of priests stepped forward. He glanced at Ibu in the distance, and in his eyes he saw surprise and confusion. The latter had never instructed him to do this, but today he truly could no longer contain himself. "High priest, I have something to say." Repeating it, his gaze shifted from hesitance to determination, and standing at the altar, Qasim turned to look at him. Waving his hand to stop the guards who wanted to suppress him by force, the high priest remained calm. He nodded slightly, indicating for the man to continue. Chapter 724 and Law_2. Speak, everyone has the right to express their opinion. Before God, we are all equal. Thank you, high priest. Grinding his teeth, the middle-aged man clad in a ceremonial robe admitted that, in his view, Qasim was an exceptional godhood practitioner whom he believed he could not match. Had it not been for such a turn of events, he felt he would never have dared challenge the other's authority. But now, having glanced surreptitiously at Lord Ibu in the distance, the middle-aged man ignored the astonishment and warnings in the other's eyes and took a step forward. "High priest, what I want to say is that we have suffered too many disasters. Violent winds, heavy rains, plagues. The dead returning to the world of the living, the earth shaking apart. You have always told us that these are the curse of the evil god, the calamities summoned by those sinful Hebrews, and that all gods would end it all. But what has happened? The sun has been extinguished. The earth has even reached its end. I did not understand until recently, when I heard that Lord Ibu had received a divine revelation." His tone growing fervent as if grasping a ray of light in desperate straits, the middle-aged man's voice grew louder. He said there are 9 pillars in the sky, and then they all collapsed. He said the sun was swallowed by the great serpent and then split in 2 by God. He also said the earth was cleaved apart, and the mortal realm will fracture. Before this I had doubted him. Until yesterday, our envoys told us that the edge of the earth had appeared. This is the prophecy. The voice echoed in the air, and Qasim watched it all quietly. He didn't care what the middle-aged man said. He was just observing the people. He saw many shift from hesitation to resolve, and even more have their eyes flicker. Such are mortals, a rabble. No one would speak out first, but once they realized they were the majority, they would become aggressive and confrontational. If Qasim had wanted to prevent all this, the best thing he could have done was to have the guards apprehend the middle-aged man as soon as he stepped forward, nipping everything in the bud. Even though it was too late to take back the past, had he decisively made a decision now, people might have been somewhat dissatisfied but also frightened by his methods, and none would dare to lead the rebellion. As long as they weren't starved, aside from those devout with strong faith, most people wouldn't really do anything outlandish. Having been high priest for so many years, he knew this best, yet at this moment Qasim chose the most passive approach. He knew that the man in front of him had no way back, yet he still let him go on. Even though he was bound to try to incite more people to confront him, it was the only way he could possibly succeed. "So, what are you trying to say?" Qasim asked indifferently. "I want to say," looking around and seeing many eyes, the middle-aged man, as if encouraged, exclaimed loudly, "I want to say that the all gods are dead. Look, the blood water in the Nile River. Look, this broken and fragmented world. There's no hope left. The all gods are dead. Just as Lord Ibu saw in the divine revelation. The God law failed. The sun has lost its light, and praying is pointless now. The God of evil, the Lord of the Hebrews, he is the true victor. If we don't want to die along with them, then we need to take action." A roar. At the fall of his words, there was an uproar. Zealous followers of the Egyptian gods shouted angrily, and those who also heard Lord Ibu's disheartened recount supported him. Suddenly, the previously silent crowd became noisy. People vented their emotions, their fears, and anxieties accumulated over time. Watching all this, Qasim just smiled and lightly tapped the ground with his staff. Thud, thud, thud. After all, his authority had been long established. As the high priest gestured, the crowd gradually quieted down. Shaking his head slightly, Qasim looked at the former middle-aged man and asked again, "So, what do you want to do?" With a smile, without waiting for a reply, Qasim gently reminded him, "That is the Hebrews' God. They were the sin people in the words of the God law. So, if you want to elevate him to the divine altar, does that mean we too are born sinful?" The crowd went silent again, and the middle-aged man seemed a bit at a loss. He didn't know how to explain, especially since just a short while ago, they were still cursing the failure of the evil god. "Ibu, come forward." Just as he expected, with a slight lift in tone, Qasim was not disappointed. He looked at Ibu, who from the beginning seemed somewhat lost. He wasn't yet up to the task, but time was not on their side. But that was fine. In the world of godhood practitioners, nothing had more status than being a near god. The rest was just minor details. "Teacher, Stepping forward slowly, Ibu still seemed a bit lost, but Qasim did not pause. "You said you received a divine revelation." "Aye. But the Hebrews claim their God only protects them. Yet as an Egyptian, you received a divine revelation, prophesying the fragmentation of the earth." In their conversation, Qasim came to a conclusion, looking directly into Ibu's eyes, and the latter seemed to understand something. Yes, his father was right, he was an Egyptian, yet he had received a divine revelation.
Chapter 725 en la 3.
And just like what was said at the beginning today, at this time, people need faith to soothe their hearts. Yes. Thus Ibu nodded. Although he still didn't know what was going to happen. The Hebrews' words are false. I have seen the God's strength and greatness. This is the divine miracle he has allowed. He is not a God of one race, one life, or some beings, but the God of everything. That is all I know. The crowd once again became agitated. as if grasping at the last straw while drowning. But Qasim could still see the crazed look gradually overtaking the faces of Ra's fanatic followers in the crowd. However, he had long been prepared, for Ibu was not only his student but also his progeny. Even though he had never received agreement from his own mouth, he still told him everything he saw and heard. So Ibu, even if everything is as you say, then what should we call the God you speak of? He began to speak in a low voice, a bit hesitant. Ibu wanted to say that name, even though it seemed not to be the holy name of God. In the instant when heaven and earth split, he faintly heard a curse, as if coming from the dying sun. It was just because of the reversal of time and space, the exchange of life and death, or perhaps his current ability, even this voice became less accurate. That is, in La? So it is Amun-Ra? Speaking calmly, Qasim repeated Ibu's words. In this moment, the previously somewhat radical believers quieted down, as if the noisy scene also realized something. In the scriptures of Ra, the world was initially created by Adam, but Adam was actually an incarnation of Ra, so they worshipped Ra Adam. And now, Ibu, who had received a divine revelation, personally told them that the God previously worshipped by the Hebrews was called Amun-Ra. The 9 pillar gods betrayed the Lord, stealing his authority, so the Lord brought down calamities from beyond the world, executing them one by one. In the end, the Lord reclaimed all that he had lost, and the former god Ra was actually just one aspect of the Lord. So this is what you have seen. Nodding slightly, Qasim showed understanding of what Ibu wanted to say. But what about the sun? Someone asked. He was originally the most steadfast believer of Ra. The extinction of the sun had nearly driven him to madness, but now it seemed he had found a direction for self-comfort, yet he still needed further explanation. If Ra was an incarnation of God, and he had been believing in the same Lord from beginning to end, then why would the sun stand against the Lord's authority and ultimately meet its extinction? Maybe it's because of Amun. This time, Qasim didn't need to speak, as someone else came to a realization. A millennium ago, when Ra disappeared, Amun came down to Thebes as the son of Ra, and he ultimately returned to the sun, calling himself Amun-Ra Adam. From that day on, the original goddess of life was killed by him, and the Hebrews became sinners. Perhaps only Her Highness Isis saw through everything, unwilling to rebel against God's will together with the divine child. And the extinction of the sun is exactly God repossessing it from Amun's hands. People just need to believe, and then some details would fill themselves in. Qasim knew this, so he wasn't surprised by the changes in the scene. No matter whether these things are true or not, from now on, this is so. I am going to die. Looking at Ibu in front of him, Qasim smiled faintly. And you will be the next high priest. Invisibly, with the death of the world and all gods, the concepts and faith that once converged upon the 9 pillar gods lost their place of return. But with the recognition of the last intelligent life form in the world, it seemed they had found their source of convergence. Chapter 726. La's the End and Godslayer Amun. It's hard to say what state I'm in now, or what I should call myself. Wandering in the void outside the world, Amun-Ra fixed his gaze on those concepts that had attached themselves to him. Divine child? A thief who stole divine authority? What are all these things? But regardless of whether Amun-Ra was willing to accept it or not, at this moment, he could not affect anything in the world anymore. Those mortals, although I never paid them any mind in the past, as Egypt's principal god, I did treat them well, if I do say so myself. I brought them good weather for their crops and allowed them to become Hemenu's most prosperous human dynasty. But now, just as the world has barely begun its destruction, they couldn't wait to abandon their old master, assign my name to another, and even dare to assign such an identity to him. This is simply an insult, an unforgivable crime. Every single one of these rebels deserves to die. Heh! Calm down. Don't be in such a hurry. Speaking in such absolutes isn't good. After all, when it comes right down to it, you're a rebel too. Besides, you are no longer Ra. The voice suddenly erupted from within, yet Amun-Ra was not surprised, only more irritated. Yes, although those mortals betrayed him when it came to Hemenu, was Ra not also a traitor who took the money and ran when the going got tough? The gap between gods and mortals is vast, but so too is the one between the world and him. Thus, perhaps in essence, Ra's behavior was no different from that of those mortals, and even in the oldest myths of the greatest civilizations, the original gods bore a certain resemblance to humans. But even though he realized this, Ra was unwilling to admit it. His plans disrupted, having lost everything that made him Ra. At this moment he felt as if he had become somewhat more irritable and prone to anger. Enough, you are me and I am you, we are clearly the same person. If I am a rebel, aren't you as well? Moreover, I'll tell you, I absolutely do not acknowledge those mortals' wild claims, that I am an incarnation of an outer god, an aspect? Ridiculous! An angry rebuke, and the thoughts swirling in the void expanded and then contracted. Amon-Ra's rage was plain to see, yet at the very depths of his heart, another voice was totally unconcerned. What did Amon-Ra's anger have to do with it? He found it amusing. Heh! One entity, yes, it seems so. But even if it's not I but we, I don't see how Ra's betrayal concerns me. After all, I am Amon. I am a part of the world, one of the 8 primordial spirits. Can one betray oneself? I don't think so. As for the mortal's speech, seemingly with a chuckle, Amon's voice was somewhat indifferent. That's not for you to decide. Everything that made you Ra has been either taken or annihilated. You are no longer Ra. That outer god who has taken everything from you, that's him. Enough! Thoughts violently shuddered. Lies do not hurt people. The truth is the swift blade. Having been Ra for who knows how many years, to one day be told your name, authority, and even the traces you've left in this world, as well as your past and future belong to someone else. This is something no person can accept. The same was true of Ra, but unfortunately, he had no means to do anything about it. Amon is right, I shouldn't be called Ra anymore, and that I can even survive now is thanks to my particular strength. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have already been someone else's prey. You see, unlike Anubis and his like, that aspiring gout-head deity of the new breed of gout-head people thought he was hiding very cleverly, and indeed, under the protection of the world power that hadn't yet dissipated at that time. He did manage to evade many prying eyes, but that most definitely didn't include the divine incarnation who caught him personally. Just as Anubis was able to spot a faith divinity the moment he landed on the ground, one that amazingly was a perfect match with the underground world excavation. It felt a bit too coincidental. But whether it was a coincidence or not, for such an outsider who posed little actual threat, neither Chaos nor Lane had much of a reaction. After all, whether Anubis was alive or dead, his actual impact was extremely limited. Even his act of creating a new race was considered a good deed, contributing to the diversity of Chaos's creatures and souls. By contrast, Amon-Ra was certainly different. One was an alien deity of the great divine power at peak times, and the other, although only for a very brief period, had still stepped onto the pinnacle of the divine, and had even possessed some higher attributes of an alien god-king. Their statuses were worlds apart, and so was the level of attention they garnered. If it hadn't been for the fact that Amon-Ra was tough to kill, he would probably have been reduced to nothing by now. For Ra, the first death he faced was that world-ending sword strike. But luckily, compared to Hemenu, Ra simply wasn't as important in the end. Thus, that strike was not directed at him, and once that strike was made, the only real threat that remained for Amon-Ra was the residual waves that lingered upon him. Indeed, the strength influenced by the creation force was terrifying, but the various moves made by Ra before the world's destruction proved useful. With complete control over the absolute void, he was not so easily killed. Chapter 727. La's the End and Godslayer Amon_2. So in this situation, Lane, who realized this point, naturally chose to first erase the parts related to La, completely obliterating any remaining association with the former god of sun and the sun, and on the side taking a small fragment of void power with him. As for what came after, he could only leave it to Chaos to resolve. Even if Lane truly intended to help without expecting anything in return, The laws of the world would probably still see him as a contender for the spoils of war and therefore directly exclude him. Thus, after completely dissolving the parts related to La, Amon-Ra successfully transcended his first calamity. Following this, Chaos's reckoning came. It was absolutely impossible to leave with the authority of the Absolute Void. When Amon-Ra, aided by the power of the Void, fled in panic to beyond the world, he was met with the surging world power of Chaos. However, compared to Lane's unexpectedly powerful strike, this time La was somewhat prepared. If he dared to flee with his loot, he surely had a contingency plan for escape. Such an attribute, truly incomprehensible. Even possessing it, I am entirely clueless as to its true nature. The power of creation, even the slightest bit, transcends all the rules understood by mortals. His consciousness swirling, although Amon-Ra was unaware that in the alien realm, another extraterritorial visitor had also touched upon this domain and, even under the suppression of existing laws, managed to play some tricks. He still clearly recognized the extraordinary nature of this power after his own experience. This was a mighty ability from the creation domain, a direct influence over the essence of all things. The characteristic of the Blood Mother tree was undying, a manifestation of its power over life and death at the level of creation, hence imbuing it with its powerful erosive and immortal traits. And when Amon-Ra gained complete control of the Absolute Void, he likewise possessed a similar ability, replacement, the existence within non-existence, the non-existence within existence. This was the symbol of the Absolute Void, and its representation in the creation domain was born from this concept as well. It could render existent things non-existent, then redefine them and turn them back to existent again. In doing so, the thing itself doesn't change, but the person controlling it does. In fact, this was Amon-Ra's original plan. He hadn't planned to wander the void, and he knew that once outside the world, he would be unable to resist the erosion of his sanity by source power. So, from start to finish, La only planned to flee with his loot and then rejoin the alien realm under a different identity, to rightfully accept this power as an alien deity. He aimed to crush the outer god, then use this supreme power to enact the transformation from existence to non-existence, ultimately taking the place of the other and joining the alien realm. By that time, the other's power, fate, and everything else would become part of him, plus the strength he originally brought from Hemenu. Even coming to the alien realm, he would still be the mightiest deity. Not a bad plan, but the only thing you didn't foresee was that you simply can't win, which is quite interesting. Now it's settled, you're betrayed by the world, you've acquired the power, but there isn't an alien god for you to replace. Facing a world's encirclement, you can do nothing but relinquish almost all your power, preserving only that hard-earned attribute and the stature of your great divine power. Quite a wretched state. If it weren't for the stature and attribute derived from the Absolute Void, you would probably be dead by now, having no means to survive in the void with mere consciousness. Now, what do you plan to do? Want to grovel a bit? I feel that you still have. Shut up. The cluster of consciousness swelled and then contracted, La no longer able to tolerate this entity continuing to speak. He should be thankful that he currently doesn't have much power, so that his empty stature can't do anything. Otherwise, the first thing La would do is to obliterate this inexplicably emerged alternate personality while it's still budding. Startled, La suddenly realized that he had encountered a blind spot. As a god, an Egyptian god, La had also devoured Adam in the past. He was very familiar with the mutual devouring among the Egyptian gods. Normally, after devouring a god, you would assimilate everything of theirs. You wouldn't expect to create a second personality. Moreover, even if an anomaly occurred due to the end of the world and a being he had once devoured emerged as one of his personalities by accident, why would it be Amon? If it were Adam, La could understand, after all, the other was a god. But Amon, wasn't he one of the 8 primordial spirits, a manifestation of the world's incomplete personalities? He had never walked the earth in the true form of life. They were like tools executing the will of the world. So what now is Amon? What else could I be? I am Amon. The voice was playful yet earnest, a contradictory tone that seemed so fitting for Amon. He appeared to know every thought in LA's mind, but La knew nothing of his. Nothing surprising about that. The more powerful something is, the more difficult it is to possess wisdom. This is a truth unchanging across all time. Gods want to have both strength and wisdom. They need to isolate its influence with godhood. Oh, that's something from the alien realm. We did it by splitting the soul, dividing Ka and Ba. But this also meant that a god's life had limits, and they would age and die. Chapter 728. The End of La and the Godslayer Amon_3. And to maintain personality while possessing great divine power, the price is even greater. I don't know how the gods of the alien realm do it, but if you are not the divine king, not the sun, in fact, you will become just like a Pep without any sanity. And if a world wants to possess wisdom, that's just an impossibility. I don't know if the alien realm has ever attempted such a thing, but as a relatively weak world, Hemenu instinctively tried. It split its strength again and again to the point where it could no longer be divided. Then it gave birth to the 8 primordial spirits. However, you also know the result. It failed because as a world, no matter how much it fragments, its essence ends there, so it could never become a living being. Whoosh! In the void, the consciousness began to churn tumultuously. La seemed to have realized something. He wanted to divide himself again. Even if after one more reduction of strength he might die from it, it's still better than dying immediately. But at this moment he discovered something in despair. The part of him that was La was actually long gone. Even the last connection, those mortals' faith, no longer believed he was related to La. Every ounce of strength he brought forth came from the absolute void, from one of the 8 primordial spirits, Amon. Heh, don't worry. I am not some personification of the world's will. The world is dead. That is an indisputable fact. With a touch of amusement, Amon let the other part of himself thrash around in all directions. He found it amusing, like a clown dancing. Although, for Amon, he didn't know what a clown was. The world once gave me the chance to have a persona, a framework named Amon. Your actions have weakened my strength. Otherwise, as a being at the peak of great divine power, Amon could never have had a will. Of course, even so, I should not have been born, but inconveniently you, as part of La, were erased by others and your own concept was lost. Amon relates to La, but sadly you probably have no connection anymore. Of course, at the very end, I must thank that outer god. Your traitorous followers began to worship him, and then provided me with a reasonable source, a source related to La. I am his rebellious divine child, who stole his divine authority, then was shattered by him. You see, in this story, Adam, Ra, Amon, even the world and the outer god, we all have our own identities and substance, only you do not. Just casually speaking, another me. What exactly are you? You are nothing. The voice that echoed in the mind became real, and Amon said indifferently, you shouldn't have existed. Past, present, future. All the foundations of your existence are gone. So what are you still living for? Without any resistance, as Amon's voice fell, La disappeared from this world. Because, just as he said, the moment La lost his own concept and passed, without Hemenu, he had already lost the foundation for existence. La became Amon Ra through carrying the world power. What does that have to do with you, some entity who is unknown? So on this day, the world of Hemenu lost an old god-king and gained a true Amon. Tisk. Other gods were born with consciousness. Only I have just been born, yet I have memories of endless eons as unwise as a stone. How uninteresting! The consciousness drifted in the void, then took the shape of a young man. Perhaps because his persona's birth and those mortals' fabricated stories were somewhat similar, Amon's new form even had a resemblance to Lane. Replacement! I still need to find a way to enter the alien realm. But then, those mortals have stumbled upon writing down my abilities as scriptures. Replace identity, replace life, replace destiny. Indeed, just looking at it, it resembles a thief who steals divine authority. Godslayer Amon, interesting. A smile curled at his lips, and the newly born Amon moved towards chaos, wandering through the pathway, pierced by the world power. The divine of the outer gods still lingered on the remnants of Hemenu, and with every bit of the residual world power that was extinguished, he could draw upon some new power of the end to nurture the demon sword. Although Ammon wished to seek some amusement to relieve the tedium of his countless years as an uninteresting godly existence, he certainly did not want to become the amusement. So, committing brazen acts, perhaps not just yet. He'd wait until he reached the other world and replaced a few more incarnations, then it would be quite fun to provoke a few gods for sport. At the far end of time and space, Chaos Underworld. When the world of Hemenu utterly crumbled, the influence of the otherworld followed suit. This place, which gathered the most primordial gods of chaos, was especially so. Chapter 729 Testing and Beginning.
Top.
At the border between Tartarus and the underworld, a subtle fluctuation slightly spread. Bounding laws enveloped the area, ejecting a dark shadow from the void. In an instant, a slight tremor spread throughout the underworld, and the master of the fields of truth seemed to notice the change here. But when Hades looked down, all he saw was the somewhat agitated edge of the abyss. It seemed spontaneous, yet possibly manipulated. Hades couldn't make a judgment. Yet thinking of the recent disturbances, he inevitably connected the two events. Underworld. Truly a season of many troubles. The voice was as deep as ever. A season of many troubles had implied meanings as well as its literal interpretation. Because it was indeed autumn in the mortal realm, and troubles had never been scarce for him. So at Hades' side, Persephone was fiddling with the pomegranate she had planted, rather than staying atop Mount Olympus. A few mint plants grew stubbornly next to the pomegranate, but the queen of the underworld clearly did not even glance at them. Apart from the two people present, perhaps no one remembered that peremptory naiad anymore. And even up to this day, Persephone found that person named Minta quite annoying. Just like God King Zeus, merely existing made her feel nauseated. What's the matter? Worrying about the disturbances in the world power again? I think you're overthinking. This kind of thing is for the God King to worry about. Trimming the excess branches, Persephone nodded in satisfaction. Growing more plants in the underworld had always been one of her hobbies. The sky would be held up by the tall ones. Think about reaching the sky, first become one of the tall ones. I wish I could, but that's not something just wishing makes happen. I don't want to consider these excess things, but when the city gates catch fire, the fish in the moat suffer too. Shaking his head, Hades saw the changing expression on Persephone's face and knew she understood his point. Yes, he was referring to the fields of truth being leveled not so long ago, speaking of divine terms. If even Zeus barely managed it, who knew what price such a small fish as him would pay if the world were to shift? I heard you brought back Zeus's thoughts this trip. What did he say? Not wanting to talk about these matters anymore, Hades also knew they couldn't be rushed. Though Persephone supposedly brought back Zeus's orders for him when she returned from Olympus, that indeed seemed odd to Hades. Earthly matters usually had nothing to do with him, and he hardly ever interfered, so what was the other party planning this time? Strictly speaking, it's not an order from Zeus. Hera spoke to me privately. But after hearing her thoughts, to say that Zeus was uninformed would be a joke. She plans to attack Athens, to level Athena's mortal sanctuary, the Parthenon temple, to the ground. Although she has made many preparations, it's still not enough. So she wants the deities of the underworld to join in as well. That's her request. Speaking calmly, the queen of the underworld showed no personal emotion. Will you agree? Hera promised after Athens is taken, a part of it will be given to you as a gift. But I imagine you don't care about mortal territories, right? Sort of. But the deities of the underworld? Hades scoffed, recalling those so-called subordinates. Hera probably doesn't mean me, so it must be Eris and others. The golden apple was her gift. Don't they now prefer to follow Zeus's command even more? Let her deal with them if they're willing. I won't stop them. After all, I can't stop them. Naturally, he could block them if he were able, but that would mean Hades was helping Athena. However, for his niece and sister, he had no desire to intervene in either. There truly were few mortal matters that Hades deemed significant nowadays. Yet this war was definitely not one of them. Let them fight. Fight until rivers run red with blood. But as long as you can't surpass Zeus, what good does winning do you? With Persephone around, Hades was somewhat informed about some earthly matters. For instance, for some unknown reason, he heard that Zeus seemed to have taken a liking to a prince named Ganymedes recently.
Top top?
Tap. At the border between Tartarus and the underworld, a subtle fluctuation slightly spread. Bounding laws enveloped the area, ejecting a dark shadow from the void. In an instant, a slight tremor spread throughout the underworld, and the master of the fields of truth seemed to notice the change here. But when Hades looked down, all he saw was the somewhat agitated edge of the abyss. It seemed spontaneous, yet possibly manipulated. Hades couldn't make a judgment. But recalling the recent disturbances, he inevitably connected the two. Underworld. Truly a season of many troubles. The voice was as deep as ever. A season of many troubles, carrying implied meanings and its literal meaning. Because it was indeed autumn in the mortal realm, and troubles had never been scarce for him. So at Hades' side, Persephone was fiddling with the pomegranate she had planted, not staying atop Mount Olympus. A few mint plants stubbornly grew next to the pomegranate, but the queen of the underworld clearly did not spare them even a glance. Apart from the two parties present, perhaps no one remembered that outspoken naiad anymore. And even up to today, Persephone found that person named Minta quite annoying. Chapter 730 Testing and beginning _2. Just like with God King Zeus, her mere existence made him feel nauseous. What's the matter? Worrying about the disturbances in the world power again? I think you're just overthinking it. These are the kinds of things that the divine king should be considering. Trimming the excess branches neatly, Persephone nodded in satisfaction. Encouraging the growth of more plants in the underworld had always been one of her hobbies. When the sky falls, the tall ones hold it up. If you aim to reach the sky, first you must become one of the tall ones. I'd like to, but it's not something that can be achieved simply by wishing for it. I don't want to think about these extra matters. But when the city gate catches fire, the fish in the moat suffer. Shaking his head, Hades saw the changing expressions on Persephone's face and knew she understood what he meant. Indeed, he was referring to the recently flattened fields of truth, a recent event for the deities. A Zeus alone could do that. If it were the changes in the world, who knew what cost such a small fish as himself would have to pay? I heard that you're also bringing back Zeus's intentions this trip. What did he say? Not wanting to bring up these issues, Hades also knew they were not urgent concerns. However, it was said that Persephone brought back orders from Zeus to him upon her return from Olympus, a fact that Hades found genuinely strange. Earthly affairs never had much to do with him. He barely interfered, so what could the other party possibly want this time? Strictly speaking, it's not an order from Zeus, but rather Hera came to me privately. But after hearing her thoughts, to say Zeus is unaware would be a joke. She is planning to attack Athens, raze Athena's mortal sanctuary, the Parthenon temple, to the ground. Although she's made many preparations, it's still not enough, so she wants the deities of the underworld to join in as well. That is her request. Speaking indifferently, the queen of the underworld was devoid of any personal sentiment. Will you agree? Hera promises that after Athens' conquest, a part of it will be given to you as a gift. But I think you probably don't care about mortal territories, right? I suppose so, but the gods of the underworld? With a cold laugh, Hades remembered those so-called subordinates. Hera probably isn't referring to me, so it must be Eris and the others. Heh! The golden apple was her gift. Perhaps they're now more enthusiastic about following Zeus's orders. Let her communicate with them herself. As long as they are willing, I will not hinder them. After all, I can't stop them. Being able to stop them would mean he could, but that would imply that Hades was helping Athena. Yet, between his niece and sister, he didn't care to involve himself with either. These days, there were few affairs in the mortal world that truly concerned Hades. Certainly, this war was not among them. Let them fight. Let them fight until the rivers run red with blood. But as long as you can't defeat Zeus, what will it matter if you win the battle? With Persephone by his side, Hades had some understanding of the matters on the surface. For example, for some unknown reason, he had heard that Zeus seemed to have taken a fancy to a prince named Ganymedes. A god fancying a mortal was not unusual, especially when it came to Zeus, if it had been a princess rather than a prince. Hera, I wonder whether, after so many years, you have any regrets, or if you have always been regretful. No one knew the answer, not even Hades. He still had to go check the entrance of the abyss, this ancient entity that had suddenly become turbulent and even released considerable power. Whoosh! On the edge of the underworld, in the realm of lightlessness, darkness took shape and Erebus emerged from it. But unlike his usual indifference, the mood of the Lord of Darkness seemed off today. Wrapped around his hand were remnants of the power from the abyss. It had been more than just a few seasons since the Feast of the Golden Apple, but Erebus's progress was not smooth. Since convincing the sea god, his next target had been the abyss. However, so much time had passed, yet he couldn't personally enter it. It was a hopeless case. After all, he was not Zeus. The divine king and the primordial gods have their differences when Tartarus instinctively repels outsiders, and there was little Erebus could do. Resigned, he had been considering putting the abyss aside for now. There was much more to prepare for, and he didn't want to hang his hopes on a single tree. But just as Erebus was about to give up, Tartarus suddenly erupted in turmoil, catching him, who was probing, off guard and causing him a minor setback. The abyss was still the abyss. Even an internal parasite couldn't weaken the strongest of the primordial gods. No, it's not a rebellion. It's sensing a threat from beyond this world. Another 9 realms, another blood mother tree? Is the disturbance in the world power coming from there? Erebus too had sensed it, albeit vaguely. Recently, the once tumultuous surge of the world power seemed to have briefly quieted. For a moment, Erebus even thought his arrangements would come to nothing, but soon after, the flow of this worldly power began anew. Yet accompanying it was a strange, fleeting look, as if being observed by an eye from the void beyond realms. This force was distinct from the chaotic gods, but just as quickly, it vanished without a trace.